Chris Dickerson, a quiet graphic designer from Asheville, never imagined that a casual night out would lead to his brutal death. Janelle Ortega, a woman looking for a fresh start, found herself trapped in a web of deception. And Lisa Gentry, grieving, vengeful, and hiding behind the face of her dead sister, would stop at nothing to make Chris pay for a past he thought was long buried. What began as a night of drinks would unravel into a shocking murder that no one saw coming. Chris Dickerson was the kind of man who lived quietly, blending into the rhythm of everyday life without drawing much attention. At 34, he had built a comfortable life for himself in Asheville, North Carolina, where he worked as a freelance graphic designer. His apartment was tidy and minimalistic, tucked away in a modest building near the edge of downtown. He wasn't exactly outgoing, but those who knew him, even in passing, described him as polite, soft-spoken, and a bit of a loner. He spent most of his days indoors, working on design projects for small businesses or biking alone through the nearby Blue Ridge trails. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, and very little in the way of drama. To everyone around him, Chris seemed like just another ordinary guy. That's what made what happened to him so hard to understand. On the night of August 14th, 2022, Chris did something out of the ordinary. He went out. A friend would later tell investigators that Chris had recently mentioned wanting to be more social, to put himself out there after a long stretch of isolation. He picked a popular bar in downtown Asheville, the Fox and Finch, known for its laid-back vibe and live music on weekends. It wasn't crowded that night, just a typical Saturday crowd enjoying drinks and music under warm August skies. Chris arrived alone around 10:30 p.m., ordered a bourbon neat and took a seat at the bar. Over the next hour, he kept mostly to himself, scrolling through his phone, occasionally chatting with the bartender. But around 11:45 p.m., two women walked in. They were dressed casually but with purpose, like they wanted to be noticed without looking like they were trying. They ordered drinks, laughed loudly, and made their presence felt in the small space. Eventually, one of them sat near Chris, and they struck up a conversation. Within minutes, all three were talking, laughing, and leaning in close. Surveillance footage from the bar later showed them exchanging smiles, clinking glasses, and clearly enjoying each other's company. By midnight, they were leaving together. The footage caught Chris walking slightly ahead, one woman on either side of him. They disappeared into the night, heading back to his apartment just a few blocks away. That would be the last time Chris was seen alive. He didn't post anything to social media. His phone went dark shortly after 1 a.m. The following morning, a neighbor would report the smell of smoke and the sound of an alarm that wouldn't stop. What appeared to be a casual, spontaneous night out had taken a dark turn behind closed doors. No one who knew Chris could have imagined that opening his door to two strangers, or so it seemed, would lead to something so brutal, so calculated, and so final. In a matter of hours, a man who had lived quietly and harmed no one would become the center of a shocking murder case that would shake the town and leave investigators grasping for answers. As detectives combed through the chaotic crime scene in Chris Dickerson's apartment, a disturbing picture began to take shape. The brutality of the attack was clear, but the methodical details suggested that this wasn't a spontaneous act of violence. It was something more deliberate. Chris's body had been left in the bathtub, his wounds deep and targeted, not random or frenzied. The water, still slightly warm when first responders arrived, had overflowed, seeping through the bathroom floor and warping the wood near the hallway. It was as if someone had tried to wash away the evidence but didn't stay long enough to finish the job. Despite the scene in the bathroom, the rest of the apartment felt staged. There were no signs of a struggle in the living room or bedroom. No furniture overturned, no shattered glass, no blood trails suggesting Chris had fought back or tried to escape. His wallet was untouched on the kitchen counter, his ID and card still inside. A nearly full bottle of whiskey stood on the coffee table beside 3 glasses, 2 empty, 1 half full. Police suspected it had been poured shortly after the trio returned to the apartment. The fire damage in the kitchen seemed like an afterthought. A single pot left on high heat had scorched the stovetop and triggered the alarm, but it hadn't created enough flames to spread. Investigators believed it was a failed attempt to start a fire and destroy evidence. If that had worked, it could have erased everything: fingerprints, blood, DNA. But it hadn't worked, and what remained offered countless clues. Forensics teams swept the apartment for prints, hair, fibers, anything that might identify the 2 unknown women. Detectives began canvassing the neighborhood, hoping someone had seen them leave or heard something strange. One neighbor remembered seeing the trio outside earlier in the night, laughing as they walked into the building, but hadn't noticed them leaving. Another claimed to hear footsteps in the stairwell around 6 a.m., but no voices and no faces. No one had a clear image of who the women were or where they had gone. Attention quickly turned to security footage. The building's entry cameras showed Chris unlocking the front door around 12:11 a.m., flanked by the 2 women. They were dressed in dark clothing, nothing flashy, and kept their faces partially turned away from the camera. The angle was too poor to provide clear facial recognition. But what stood out was what wasn't there. Hours of footage after that moment showed no one else entering or exiting Chris's apartment, no signs of either woman leaving. This gap in the timeline disturbed investigators. Either the women had found another way out of the building entirely, or they were still somewhere inside, hiding, waiting. Police searched the premises from top to bottom, including storage rooms and the basement. There was nothing. All that remained was a dead man in his bathroom, a partially burned kitchen, and 2 women who seemed to have vanished into thin air. The case had gone from a suspected burglary to something far more chilling: a planned and personal murder committed by people who had left no immediate trace. The question now was why? And who? With no sign of the 2 women and no leads from the apartment, investigators turned their focus to the missing hours between when Chris Dickerson was last seen alive and when his body was discovered. The clock was ticking, and every moment, without answers, only deepened the mystery. The evidence at the scene had raised more questions than it answered. Chris had invited 2 women into his home, likely thinking he was about to enjoy a casual evening of drinks. Instead, by sunrise, he was dead. Police began tracking his movements from the moment he left the bar. Surveillance footage showed Chris leaving the Fox and Finch around 11:55 p.m., walking down the sidewalk with the 2 women beside him. They appeared relaxed, not hurried, chatting casually. Investigators pulled footage from every available camera on the streets between the bar and Chris's apartment, building a near-complete path of their walk. Nothing seemed unusual. There were no signs of tension or argument. The 3 entered his building at 12:11 a.m. and were never seen again. From that point, there was a 6-hour gap, 6 hours in which everything changed. Police believed the murder happened sometime between 2 and 4 a.m., based on the condition of Chris's body and the timeline of the fire alarm. But without footage of the women leaving and with no neighbors reporting anything alarming, Detectives had to consider the possibility that the women had taken an unconventional route out of the building. A back door? A fire escape? They returned to the building's security system and confirmed there were blind spots, places with no camera coverage, particularly the emergency stairwell that led to a parking lot behind the building. It wasn't commonly used and had no working camera. Investigators shifted focus to street-level cameras and traffic surveillance in the surrounding area. After cross-referencing timestamps, they finally caught a break. At 6:43 a.m., a traffic camera 2 blocks from Chris's apartment captured a blurry image of a woman walking briskly down the street alone. She was wearing what appeared to be a dark hoodie and carrying a large handbag. Her face wasn't visible, but her build and clothing matched one of the women from the bar footage. Police widened their search area and checked nearby businesses for outdoor cameras. A liquor store's security system caught another angle just minutes later. This time the footage showed the same woman walking into a motel on the edge of town. Inside the lobby, she paid in cash, avoided eye contact, and checked into a room under the name Elena Cruz. Detectives obtained a warrant and descended on the motel within hours. In the room, they found the woman asleep, fully dressed. Her belongings were sparse, just a duffel bag, a cheap phone, and a half-burned purse stuffed into the trash. Inside that purse, investigators discovered a cracked driver's license belonging to Janelle Ortega. She had a minor criminal history, a few shoplifting charges, drug possession, and 1 prior arrest for fraud. She was taken into custody without resistance. What no one could have predicted was what she was about to tell them, or who she said had really committed the murder. At first, Janelle Ortega stayed silent during questioning, offering little more than her name and basic personal information. She appeared tired but calm, avoiding eye contact and speaking in clipped sentences. Detectives knew from experience that silence often masked guilt, but sometimes it concealed fear. After several hours and a quiet promise of leniency in exchange for cooperation, Janelle finally began to talk. What she said turned the case upside down. Janelle claimed that she had not planned to kill anyone that night. According to her, the entire encounter was orchestrated by the other woman, the one who had walked into the bar with her and later disappeared without a trace. Janelle called her Marcy. She said Marcy was the one who had targeted Chris, the one who insisted on going to the bar that night, and the one who insisted they go home with him. Janelle maintained that she believed it was all just a party, drinks, maybe some flirting, nothing more. But once they were inside Chris's apartment, Marcy's demeanor changed. Janelle described a chilling transformation. Marcy, who had seemed composed and charming at the bar, suddenly became cold, almost mechanical. After Chris poured them drinks and put on music, Janelle claimed that Marcy began asking Chris personal questions, digging into his past, his dating history, his memories of a woman he'd once been involved with. Janelle didn't recognize the name at first, but then Marcy said it. Marcy Lowell. That's when the truth began to take shape. Janelle was stunned when she learned the woman she had been calling Marcy all night was not Marcy Lowell at all, but her younger sister, Lisa Gentry. Lisa had apparently taken on her sister's identity, including her name and online accounts, to lure Chris into a meeting under false pretenses. Marcy Lowell had died in a car crash the previous year, a fact Janelle had been unaware of when she first met Lisa through a local social group. According to Janelle, Lisa blamed Chris for her sister's downfall and eventual death. The story she told was filled with bitterness. Lisa believed Chris had emotionally abused Marcy, pushed her to the brink, and then moved on with his life, as if nothing had happened. In Lisa's mind, justice was overdue. Janelle told detectives that after a few drinks, Lisa pulled a knife from her purse. There was no warning, no fight. Chris was taken by surprise. The attack happened in the bathroom, where Lisa claimed she wanted to talk to him in private. Janelle heard a thud, then silence, followed by the sound of water running. When she looked inside, she saw Chris in the tub, already covered in blood. Lisa was standing over him, her hands shaking but her face blank. Janelle said she panicked. Lisa told her to help clean up and not to ask questions. Terrified, Janelle obeyed. After attempting to wipe down surfaces and start a fire to cover the evidence, they left separately. Lisa took Chris's laptop and phone with her, telling Janelle it would delay identification and buy them time. That was the last time Janelle saw her. Lisa disappeared into the early morning, leaving Janelle behind to deal with the aftermath. But now police had a bigger problem. Lisa Gentry wasn't just missing. She had managed to impersonate a dead woman and commit murder under her name. The search for her was just beginning. With Janelle Ortega's confession in hand, investigators now had a clearer picture of what had happened inside Chris Dickerson's apartment. But their most dangerous suspect was still missing. Lisa Gentry had slipped away into the morning, shadows carrying Chris's laptop and phone, leaving behind a scene of brutality and deception. The woman who had orchestrated the entire crime had not only killed, but she had done so while pretending to be her dead sister. Now she was somewhere out there, and time was running out. Detectives worked quickly to verify Janelle's claims. They confirmed that Marcy Lowell, the woman Lisa had been impersonating, had indeed died the year before in a fatal car crash. It had been ruled accidental, a one-car incident on a rainy highway outside of Raleigh. Marcy had struggled with depression and addiction for years, but no foul play had ever been suspected. Her funeral had been quiet, and Lisa Gentry was listed among the surviving family members. Suddenly, that tragedy took on new meaning. Police pulled Lisa's old records. There wasn't much. A few citations, a minor trespassing charge in her. Early 20s, but nothing violent. She'd lived in and out of North Carolina, sometimes under aliases, often keeping a low profile. But her online presence told a darker story. Investigators discovered that Lisa had been running several fake social media accounts, some of which were created in Marcy's name. Through these, she had reached out to Chris weeks before the murder, pretending to be Marcy, claiming she wanted to reconnect and apologize for the past. It was a web of manipulation carefully crafted over time. The public was shocked when the story broke. News outlets ran headlines about the ghost sister killer, a woman who had worn the identity of the dead to carry out her plan. Tips started, coming in from all over the region, but most led nowhere. Then a gas station attendant in eastern Tennessee recognized Lisa from a photo. She had stopped there just days after the murder, buying supplies and asking for directions to a rural town in the mountains. It was a long shot, but police followed the lead. They found her hiding in a small cabin belonging to a cousin who claimed to have no idea what she had done. Lisa was arrested without incident. In her possession were Chris's phone and laptop, both wiped clean. She said nothing as she was taken into custody. During her trial, Lisa showed little emotion. Prosecutors presented evidence of premeditation, manipulation, and the twisted revenge fantasy she had carried out. Janelle Ortega, who testified against her, received a reduced sentence in exchange for her cooperation. Lisa Gentry was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The murder of Chris Dickerson shocked the quiet town of Asheville and left a haunting message about how grief, if twisted, can become something dangerous. A man trying to move on with his life became the victim of someone who couldn't let go of the past and was willing to become someone else to settle the score.